God so knoweth the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of God to human beings. Thou canst see the story, the circular woman shall be plain. I prostrate the doctrines that God bless you. When I was ready to serve, you praised us your strides to the same kinds of in this world. You people are wise your body sports supreme with the motion like gold mountain, rain the blade, winner of the base, to the earth, with the freedom dying, color and gold to you are prostrate. Thou bring like people are the wise one to you I prostrate. And say you having great compassion about the qualities like the last ocean. To you, the one God, the purity that brings one protection, the verity that brings the one heart to sublime reality, the bound that takes life. So all other grace and all the joy of the path of liberation, the whole field of God life and realizations, to our lamented qualities. You sublime means homage to the supreme word, homage to the dark refuge, homage to the great savior, to all three of the divine homage, all render your respect, now in his body, sustains all our sentence and all respect. There's a very faith that do not permit any virtuous actions, one of the virtuous actions. So do you want to know, this is a teaching of the Lord. And a illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning and God, same condition things of such. Through these merits make sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the faults and be delivered from samsara's ocean, return by the ways of age and sickness and birth. Page 15. I prostrate for the area triple gym. Together with the at that time, the vital one was absorbed in the concentration of the capital of the also, the very practical I mean, all those 5 evidence also leading to the power of the to be able to shower and status in the body self of how to use stuff to use friends with the practice. You take that and the body self of shall picture in this country for the words of the practice, yet to the Holy Ghost, 5 always indeed, this is one. What was also not understandings. The same one in the discrimination, constitutional factors, and problems in the trade. There are brutal lies and all phenomena without characteristic, unproduced, unseen, stainless, not felt stain, not efficient, not fulfilled. There are brutal, therefore, and emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no feeling, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no consciousness element. There is no ignorance and no station of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging here, and no exception of aging here. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and power. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and all is no attainment. Therefore, there is no attainment. Body suffers, rely on and dwell with perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration, without fear. Having completely passed the old era, they reach the end point of nirvana. all the bullets who dwell in the 3 times, also manifestly leading away to uncontrollable, perfect, complete enlightenment, and relies upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Gadi, Paragadi, Parasambhadi, Vajstoma. Shara Buddha, the body itself from Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. In the bottom one, it rises from that concentration and completed the Bodhisattva area with Chavara saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom just as you indicated, even without adulterous. The Bhagavan really thus spoken, the venerable Sharana Buddha, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva area of Vijayavana, goes surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, and souls and Gandharvas, or overjoyed in divine praise is spoken by the Bhagavan. Page 25, and then now. Saji Kofi Junche Minto Cham, Ray Ram, and Chini Devian Pai. Sanje Change Chanama Chanjo Bada Dami Age Chijin Ye Son Ye Dora Benje Sanje Dora Sanje Change Chanama Chanjo Bada Age Chijin Ye Son Dora Benje Sanje Dora Judan Zoje Jana
Yes, assuming the correct intention for listening to the Four Noble Truths, not just for oneself, but as the kind parents of this life have nurtured us, so all beings have. So listening solely with that beneficial intention of the enlightened thought of bodhicitta.
아, 야, 다, 가봐 보면 나랑 저기 디지 돌아야 야지. 퇴주충, 삼주충, 공주충 어디에 겨워서 뭐 이해로.
Rejoicing that again we have the opportunity to hear, reflect, and meditate on the Four Noble Truths. Rejoicing in that opportunity.
야, 다, 기생한도 템바시나기다. 네, 동해demba, 군주demba, 템바시. 동해demba다 군주dem바다 도피러버지 도스마레와. 하. 하들이 복데. 다음저 니 드링스나 기시야 넘바데 냠렌지르 배운 신시에 오레스로. 냠렌지르 배운 신에 네 탐보. 동해demba, 동해 내가 시고 오레스. 안데네 니 규군중 빵고 요레스로. 아니 규군중 빵베 빵바 꼭 빵원데 치고 요레스로. 아니 고방원데 치월라 아니 탐란 남고 뭐 요레스지. 다디 냠내 치단 그린 거 신시단 레스로.
Past classes, we've been looking at, in the context of the Four Noble Truths, the first two of true sufferings and true origins. We've looked at them in an essential way, in a pithy way. And now we come to true cessations. The way we've been approaching the Four Noble Truths is the way that they're practiced in terms of the first noble truth of true sufferings, knowing its reality. Secondly, in terms of that, abandoning the cause of those true sufferings, true origins. And thirdly, actualizing the true cessation. And in order to do that, the fourth true paths, becoming familiar with that, manifesting that.
다딜라 페나 말한저 디 참마냐샤 som다디 야고도 지난저 검제리라 루트마냐샤 토트마냐샤 심트마냐샤 최트마냐샤 시지 트마냐샤 시간 som당 요라 당부 루트마냐샤 되어서 수수 루 내가디 som당로 루딜레야다 아니 동해나서 남바 망고 휴지 용되고 신고도 알아 다 동해의 동해다 유의 동해다 신뢰라고도 다 딜레신베 니 저도 유의 동해라지 그 풍부 다가라 니 동해거라 시래 그래서는 풍부디 gen직 채널 남산 동해 기요니 게마데디 동해 매베 소리도 티 가르는 시작하라면지 동해 기셔셔시 대대요 어디 신기요로 티 니 내단지 마시나나 동해다 그 전도도 지 테드로지 뭐라고 지 강발라고 마스스나 마디 타야다 저것도스나 니티 저것도야 저주바지다 칼라체도 전도도 라고다 강발라 마스스 타동스나 나속다제 동해디 메어르시는 삼산디 뭐 텐데디 로디 여러 튼들레 여러 니 규르베 동해디니 다 먼저 믹세 망바지고 말에 니 치료도 저 규베 동해라 텐데 로지기 여러 다 뒤지 동해 숨게 저와지 동해 써야 돼 동해 신이 좀 아니 동해 괜찮나 게임이 동해 게임하는 마진이 그리스도 어디 방카가 여러 시카가 여러 뒤더 마바노이나 가두이네 동해 뇨지 돼야지 책이 여러 와 어디다 동고 수술을 따지 수술을 따지로 수술 동행이 온다는 도저로 상담하지 상담이나 여러 와서
It is good to reflect on the Four Noble Truths with the close placement of mindfulnesses, which we are familiar with. Those four of close placement of mindfulness on body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And firstly, taking the body as a reference point as our meditation, understanding its temporal nature, its changing nature, and that is its suffering and reality. And with regards to the close placement of mindfulness of body, there's three types of suffering: suffering of suffering, suffering of change, compounded pervasive suffering. In reference to these very aggregates, that third one, these very aggregates are in that nature of compound pervasive suffering. Why? Because if the body meets with just a slight condition, it can be ill at ease or suffering. And if there's no condition that's met, well-being is there. So this is a reality. It is good for us to know that reality with regards to this. Okay, so with regards to the first of those three sufferings, the suffering of sufferings, animals recognize that level of being wounded, hungry, and the extent that they're wounded, not wanting to be wounded, feeling that pain and so forth. The suffering of change is something that's recognized by both Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. But this third type of suffering, compounded pervasive suffering, is much more difficult to firstly recognize, but then secondly abandon. But it is good to recognize that this compounded pervasive suffering, just because we have this body, when we meet the conditions commensurate, suffering is there. And we don't get over that until we recognize that pervasive nature. So it's good to have the references of body in that regard.
다들 안딘데게 동에 다 동에디 규밀레디네 총 말해서 토와 디둑 담아지 끼어야 되러 더 동에는 디둑 차단되는 게임도 근데 육군중을 담아쳐라 근데 다직 사무단야 얘기 용되기도 하더라 사무단이 지금 용되기 요를 하고 되다 지 랑조를 차고다 신조를 다음에 이 로디 되네 먼저 동해 뭐 용구요 등 아주 싱그레도 다 라고래와 다 대야 간에 중도 상담되네 때문에熊나신다 다 때문에 이제 말을 총을 해서 말을 때네 다 차단 총을 해서 시기요래 다 간데스 중구도 하러 먼저 간데스 시고도 하러 말을 때네 차단 간데스 시고도 했을 그래서 차와지세 유데라 나데라 가기요 서와 나데라 가고요 서와 예 차와지는데 나데라 가고요 세 네 당보들라 나시지 나 하나 때문에 이가 템버투가지 샤제 티 유지를 가기요 삼탄단지 야베 유코란트 베지 이 두자로 지구에는 용어 넘버를 스타운데 하나 때문에 유나 유화지가 이지체제 티 문에 지는데 딘지 계단 제제 간에 때위는지 지 간상가 단지기 말이고 꾸네라 아니 되네 지 유코란 데모도 다운데 출 단지 차로 러시아다 데 단지디 아디 두고요래 단지디 아니 다 단지들로 튼dü이나메 두툼나 디 윤세요 두툼나 아니 꼭내라데 somebody 고공원의 체세 고바디 네 무슨 도레스로
It is good to reflect in terms of sufferings when we think of placement of mindfulness of feelings. The sufferings don't come about through no cause. And if we look at true origins, in terms of desirous attachment on the one hand and aversion on the other hand, it's like attachment to self and aversion to other, dependence on those two, suffering comes about. Well, that's just a gross level that it functions on in terms of the feeling, true origins and so forth. But if we trace that deeper, certainly as it's stated in the texts and sources, what's behind the production of desires, attachment, and aversion is this confusion or ignorance grasping at true existence. So ignorance underlies those disturbing thought obscurations. For example, the notion of I like something, when it's coming from that kind of tendency or reality, what's appearing is a non-dependent, truly existent I in terms of the person. Secondly, it could be from the object's point of view that you see as attractive. And the object that's appearing to you is a non-dependent, truly existent object, and it depends on that. Denzin, you allude to its true existence. So we have these groups of grasping at a self of person and grasping at a self of phenomena. But when we trace the grasping at a self person and the continua of that process, then we can start to see, is it possible to sever such a grasping by tracing it to the source? Can it be severed completely or not? Here we come to the third of our Four Noble Truths of true cessations. Yes.
제가 가사게 나스라 나주도 나주민도 나야고요 나두자의 상당우다 티네가랑 사실 이지질리도 다든데 나데 니까데르다 도 타도도 엄마 팅주에 따도 시에잖아 나스데 칸나 때문에 유중은에 자담바 투러버지 요 땡도 이지치고라 유고라 다델라 삼무다에 뭐 당당도 그래 거대워시나 근데 그 나세야디 칸나 때문에 아니 요와지 유중은에 자담바 투되어 요와지 이지치 템바데 디진운데 단지사 차로 다 텐데 단지디 와 단지디 가르스나 셈데 와 셈데라 아니 셈 로친줄로 가지고 친주 말로 가지고 디니샤 봐 베나 먼저 아니 셈제 다두슬람는 마미다 발라샤나라 마미다 와스라 마미다 버레 상나 마미다 버레스로 게지게지 지로 그래서 로시도와 텐델로디 아니 바바바 제요나 그 문에 덴바 살 고식처로 채우려고 그래요. 미다로 나 미다고도 로드 가르서는 간지하게 나디 미다고래 되라. 다 딜레 셴베 단지 말아버체 당질라는 나 딱와서 나 베리 가두이나 데데기 요래 삼제 아니 나디 다 딘데지 이지 체제라 나디 해삼 따인데 다 딘델로디 파파파파 제요나 아니 그 럭시 뭐라고 나디 아니 되는 미다고래 에 지수미 지남도 된다 뭐지게 다 따고 따되기 요래 말아서 나지 진지로 계산가 드링가도 찍고 따되기 요래 계산가다 먼저 드링가도 찍고래 배로 다나를 배 저는 의미지 말아 의미지 계지 요래 이제 단계게 아니 가두이나 대든지 로디 진질로래도 홀라 따고 되면도 잡된 처음에다 그 매우 차르고도 알로디로 베데 유고라 매우 차르지 근데 젬벨로데 매우 차르고로 다 저저드네 나디 미다고래 산다는데 나디 미다고래 에너지 미다고래 로데 튼디버래 가두이나고 매우 세 메디지로 로 튼디데 매우 차게 깝치는 매우 치로 잡된 처음에 요지 차려야지 디네갑디 Lola Yantawata, Yantawama Banio, the similar, this she was wrong.
So the notion of a person being happy or sad, feeling good or bad, and one might allude to that, believing it, is like a kind of in a mistaken way, because the way the I that's appearing to oneself is as if it's a kind of a non-dependent I, or that it's 100% intrinsic, and one alludes or believes at that. And, you know, there's that appearance of that I that's non-dependent 100%. Now, if one clings to that appearance of a non-dependent I, that's called grasping at a self of persons. Now, that's a mind. It's a mistaken consciousness. So you have mistaken consciousnesses and unmistaken minds, unmistaken consciousnesses. The one that clings to I being non-dependent is a mistaken one. However, if you do an analysis of, for example, your impermanence, and you search for the I, you come to conclude that, well, because the I is always changing, then you kind of conclude that it's an impermanent thing. When you try and find it, you come to see that it is impermanent just by doing that close placement. But if you have the thought that, let's take the opposite, that you are grasping at the I being permanent. Here, this is a mental construct. It's an inappropriate consciousness, or an inappropriate thought, because you can reflect that the I of yesterday and the I of today is not the same, is it? The yesterday I is not me today. So one can come to see that within one's meditation or reflection, there's like a mistaken consciousness that doesn't hold up under analysis, meaning this non-valid I. The grasping at a permanent I is not valid. But when you reflect on the fact that you're impermanent, you can never make your I permanent. It's always going to be impermanent. So that's more of a valid, you're coming to like a valid summation in that one. Yes.
And the law, Chigla, Captain Sama Yo, Chigla Captain Sama Meva.
Yeah. So let's just say one of those minds is valid and one of them's invalid.
When the Captain Sama Yo, they Mamida were a satiro. So Captain Sama Carreras, no? Well, move ne look at Chuni Ribato Zoga Demo. Chuni Ribate Carson, Mamida were imbate. And a Congo Nizuli there, or Nizula, Mamida were there. Midawa de Kare Midawa Chawas and Juyengi to be Jodo de Gioras. Te any Chukelenare, Kamalenare, Suinare, Karinare, Jeglosun Enigina, or Reshanga, Te Jododos, or Judan Jane, then Jodo de Godos, Niti Losun Enigina, Tamlo de la Jabu, Dembatan, Kawashigro. Then the Jabin Sama Yora, or Ratella, and
now, when we look at those two, the valid consciousness and the invalid one, so the valid one that's thinking I'm impermanent, why would we say that's valid? Because it can be supported by a type of reasoning that is, it is just the nature of things. Gyapten Sama, it's supported by a type of valid cognition. Why? Why am I impermanent? Because I'm a product of cause and conditions, and I'm thoroughly going through momentary changes. And whether you believe in Dharma or not, that's the case. Anyone that's endowed with a mind who reflects can see that. And anyone who understands the process of causes and conditions and reflects, and that is wise, can introduce it to themselves by discriminating.
다드네 nga 다드로 지메 단진들라 단진들라 나 다면도 왜 싫어니라 결된 제마 유메 계시셔니 난다 아 벤진로산 주지 단지 신지에서 배제저로 단지당 다면도 왜 싫어니 바로 자르자디 싫어 이 다버려 저 단지라고 다 지나라 다면도 왜 싫어라고 다 단지 수로 그냥 다 결된 제마 유에스게요 그래서 항저 지금 미만유로 시작이 있나라 말이 잡죠 망아요 스tam블링나라 아니 담블링나 미만샤니 단지 다음에 또 동의 있어야 되는데 더 나오거나요 말했어요 그러다가 나서 저 켈레니네 저 켈레니 로와 저 켈레니나래 네 다음에 남자 켈레나 딘중 남자 켈레 오로 딘중 남자 켈레나 군조라도 샤도고 말아 제가 아니 저 켈레니네 힌두 예수 가지디게 상은 군조 켈레니냐로 되라 아 건전히 단지 갑로고는 뭐지 다음에도 베셔라 주도 지고요 말아 다드네 낭바레서 낭발 산다로 낭발 산다나 낭바 탤런트 틱진레 탤런트 틱미 망아요래로 틱미기 다 추진이도 망아요래 로 아 틱진나라 벼요래 속보요래 아니 개밀라 데스 요래 숙초모야 말 개밀라 아니 베트남인 데도가 아니 안된데로래다 봐 아니 시라요 말에 다 데이터 디진 나로네 아니 뭐네게 다 지금 배우는 거 치는네 그 낭바 인생이 배우는데 인생이 나래 동만이 남샤에 오지 거쳐지 냠내지 하전 유유로 그래서 왜로 뉴비 나로 아니 버드로 루기나 단지를 토비야 단지를 토브다 마뉴기 상단에다
Yes, a page is sending to see tricky Gelson.
벤질로선 추지 벤질로선 추지
Yeah, so Panchen Losang Chuki, he sets it forth like these two are having a debate or a fight or a dispute. So on the one hand, you've got self-grasping that alludes to true existence. And on the other hand, you have the wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness. And he kind of puts it like, well, actually, the self-grasping is going to win the fight because they're like in the majority. So the self-grasping says to the wisdom consciousness realizing emptiness, you say you are valid, you say you are valid, that things don't intrinsically exist, but just look at the nature of things. I'm more valid because most people believe it. I mean, meaning that there are more people in the world that believe in the self. There are more people that don't, that don't practice Dharma than do. And within those that practice Dharma, more allude to a self than more than don't, isn't it? So therefore, in terms of like democracy or majority, the most are alluding to a truly existent self-grasping. And even if we look at Thailand, China, Vietnam, Mongolia, those practitioners, how they look at the various subtleties of self or not. And even within the Mahayana vehicle in Tibet, within Buddhists, those who understand emptiness really thoroughly and actually realize it are fewer than the others. So really, self-grasping wins.
제가 제가 배워지라 이 망조세들라 특히 저자는 아니 겨몽도 저버자고라 망조사디 미망의 켈렌체와도 저지고래라라
야
딜라나 단질 토도고다 미망아디게 단지 잡도고라
야
나 망조라들라 윤저 칼라워스나 미망이 데둑조 상단 딜레 펜도여도 저지고래라는데 디 담에도 셔럽라
Yeah, so we have to think about majority and democracy, and we debate these words in Tibetan. We don't get democracy, just in terms of who wins. More people probably think the self-grasping kind of wins. But if majority, 정부디?
미망이 대독조 제와이나.
Oh yeah, but if you look at the second one of what's benefiting beings more, not in terms of democracy of what people believe, but what benefits them more, in the latter case, wisdom, consciousness, realizing emptiness is more important.
다 로라 삼단다와 삼단나 아니 다 단지디 아니 거 가져파 삼단미나 가져질라 콜라드라지리 미주지게 거 카셀셀셀 돼요 말이와 단지디 바곰 잡제 네 단지기 유 가장게 다데 뭐네지 파제제 거네지 하주지 제제 뭐네지 유나 컨디스도 삼단인데 저는 이제 휴지 망고 제가 말해 곰데스 잡제 제와데스 제위나 남산 심나는 이게ව로 니에다 대다 민도산 남산 뭐 텐좀사제로 가디 유나면은 다 민도선 아니 이주지 코아니 아니 간장질라 세명이 원이 세명이 원이도 다 민도 다 데모드에 다 민도스로 네 상당히 네 참마디 근데 참마지기 또 그거 매우 서로다라
But actually, if we take our mind's reflection on self-grasping, on the existence of persons, and we try and find the person under analysis, it doesn't take long when we meditate on the focal object of person, taking person as an object, to find its unfindability. Just by meditating on it a bit, you start to doubt its intrinsic. And this is the fact that starts to tend towards the doubt. And then you ascertain its non-intrinsic nature, and then you start to accept it. And then you've kind of reached more of like a Captain Sama, a valid cognition of its lack of intrinsic nature.
그래서 tinday chane samnata danjigi dadi tuwa yu da megane samdana danjigi mewadi kumni danjigi mewe sewa dila ani kogdenyo ya damedowe shera digi da khasanga da yo mare siyada khasanga da yo re siyani khasanga jigi gyula lo nyinga jigi jadi gyu tuigu mara pena me top hajang shuk chumbo yosijila changri top chumbo di ne tuumundara me 파야
Fire, yeah.
매 하장 숙청보 여서지라 장리 와 장리 정모 첨보 숙청보 내 도면도 티나시 담에도 왜 셔러 여서들라 단지디 내 두고야 말에 시직라로다 간상하게 다 지는데 담에도 왜 셔러 용도 말에 가장 다 민두사는 가장 다 요지인도 로직
And in that case, then, when the person is doing a reflection as to whether or not the person, self-grasping, whether the self-person exists in a certain way or not, and one starts to clear away doubts and come to a valid kind of conclusion, then one starts to see the possibility of true cessation, similar that if there's a very strong and powerful fire, cold can't exist simultaneously with it. So similarly, when one starts to analyze person and conclude it's, that ego clinging is false, those two, the wisdom consciousness, seeing the lack of intrinsic nature, and incorrectly grasping at a self-person. They can't exist simultaneously on the one mind at the same time.
그래서 타르바도요인데 타르바도지 리과데라 남리 루니베나 간상의 단지죠로 간상의 단지딜라 아니 균디마 고 균마마티 균세베 세와요레스로 간상 단지 저 통마메와 통마메와네 마 충어데 타마메와라 마 줘야요 말레스 고 간삼질라 고 세루레스로 세베 줌제 가래라데 코 유 가자 단지들 담에도 왜 셔럽 냠보 담에도 왜 셔럽 냠보디 요레스 냠보디 또비 단지디 좀더 그래스 당당데 파워 두지지 파워 두지 타고 된 두지지 리바 어디더라다 줌제 리바 투드레스로
And then in the teaching on Pramanavirtika, early cognition, there's a line of reasoning that validates the possibility of actualizing nirvana, the liberated state. So it is that we take, it's like a, what's it called, syllogism, take grasping at a self of persons. It follows that it can be severed because the antidote, wisdom, consciousness, realizing emptiness, can be applied. So what's been said is since beginningless time, ego clinging or clinging at a self of persons, that continua or continuum can be severed and the state of true cessational liberation reached when the antidote is applied.
제가 어딘데스다 타워 두지를 뭐 시게요.
Yeah, sorry, Krishna. That's the kind of reason that validates the fact that true cessation can be actualized.
그리고 타워스에 균쟁단에 두고로
Yeah.
균쟁리베도 두고로
Yeah.
이 산제 타워 요래에서는 이지 제약을 했고 타방어도 리베도 두고 요래서
Yeah. So when we think about nirvana, liberation or cessation, there must be a reason that validates its possibility. One wouldn't say, oh, just because Buddha said so, it is the case.
제가다 진짜게 다디 탄다네 알아서 소소 상담 요르다로 한조 베나 나 계속 쉬우지 선배 내가 들라 맞다 나 스네비 쉬우지 지 유베 그 내가 들라 텐데 나 그런 컨디션도 봐 따되는 따제시는 봐
야
따되는 코 때니에메는 유지 딩에 상담 나신지 나디 된데 레멘도 상레인데 아니지 뒤중에 배민 맞게 차오 민가게 차오 밀리아 아니지 콘데 밀리아 콘데라 밀리아 지페 니 가서 그래 자리 차오 롱 차오 근데 이나 근데게 나다 텐데 내 상다 뒤중에 네 이제시야 나디 민두가 서와
야
상담인데 아니 내 미신달 같이는 알게서 체대고요래 같이는 내 밀을 타도 치고요래 같이는 내 밀을 롱딩 거 섬디 아니 심데즈 마 싫어요
야
진짜 쉬워서야 돼 용구요 진짜
알겠습니다.
디 먼저 상담나 다 거기인데 맡으면 단대지다 먼저 상담다 저기 셈나라 녀어디 용구를 진짜 쉬워야 돼 하바스야 쉬워서야 돼 찬음서야 쉬워서야 돼 오늘 등라 시와자고로 먼저 시와 취주된대로 연구해야 하고데 다음에 단지 주모도 강 상담단지 될 롭죠 다들 롭죠 적으로 와 롭죠 망고체 니 개배 중도도 다 니수수 상담다 네 직다 내주 망고지 상담다다 인데 강단지라 나시니 칸데메도도 나티 네 단다 이지체 나디 민두스러다 상담인데 아니 미신다 같이는 게 컨트롤한 거를 같이는 자리자고 같이는 마지막 치고를 했는데 수수수래야 나디 때마 시장보로 시장으로 테스트에서 좋아로다 가서는 또 뉴아요를 치는데 공장 어다 대책 용사래서 근데지 상무실래나 오늘다 타발라지 유튜브사에 삼제 아니 신들다 타버터야겠다 배정 가지고 있을 때 남라고도 오세요 신들 준비해야 당 타버터니래야 당 오늘 지금 심 띵게 다 지금 냠래 친이지 차야를 러요 그래서 상담으로
야 It's important to think when one has these feelings of I'm the most important. There's a strong kind of sense of self-importance or I, and then it's good at those times to reflect what's the nature of that I that's experiencing such feelings, to check through analysis, can you find it? Times when there is tremendous pride or anger. And if one can do that type of reflection, one can conclude the I that was appearing at those times of great pride or anger doesn't exist actually the way it appeared to. So the way that the I is normally appearing to you is not really like that. That's not like reality. You know, the person that had those disputes and was proud and got angry. So, or irritable. And then when you do that reflection about yourself, relating to your own experience, you start to feel a bit more peaceful. And here, this brings in this notion of pacification or peace, one of the attributes of true cessation. And there's just, okay, so even though we don't get the nirvana, we just get a taste of experience of softening or being more peaceful by analyzing, you know, who was experiencing anger and so forth. So therefore, you know, it's very important in that sense that we study about things like non-self, to really think about the way the I appears to you as a non-dependent, autonomous thing, and analyze whether that's valid or not, because then you'll start to think, well, the I that appeared to me before doesn't really exist like that. So why was one so irritable or angry? And one can start to soften in that regard through experiencing it in life. And then one can start to also see that peace in terms of true cessation, is that obtainable? And when one starts to think of the cessation in terms of it being obtainable, one starts to think about the fourth truth of the path, of actually cultivating it through effort. And then the mind that wants to go for liberation starts to be produced, and one starts to get a feeling of wanting to practice deeper in Dharma. No, it's things sabodos.
Jema, mama, ngala ta tangbo ji taba yuwe nga yiji yuwa, yiji di thoma khande chungla na, ngazo migyu ju na ne zun thama tsikzub saya jita, she yo mare la korwa, chanda, a dinde samdang de ne, tsikzub rawa, tsikdu ja lawi na, yu ne, 근데 책인데 밀어봐 두자 라디로와 사상은 책 두자 쇼고 더와 근데 책 두자데 밀어봐 시에 사비시고 정보 수수 교면 더와
야
수 교면 더다 미 파르버도 교면 시샤로다 대다체 뭐라다 망게 나라이네 교용 오면 더데 저런저래 지금에 미신달라 책 두자지 시에다도 다가라 제데 수수마지고 차고도 다 디인디네 다 딘데스 마지버디 동해진 연구도 알아. 이제 다 니마 들리는가 책도 막으면서 와. 책도 밀라 책도 시기면 마디 삽삽치긴 있어. 근데 책도디 방샤는 와. 책도디 방샤데. 책도디 가샤데. 아니 직내단 진짜 토요인데 남산 책도디 마셔야라. 핑도. 책도 마셔나는 뭐마에는 책도 시에서 이제 마지버지 연구 동해진 연구로 다 다른 직접의 방향이다. 아니 직접 시험을 되는 중에 동의된 연구면도 와. 수술라 내다 강의지 태위네 동의 퇴바지 연구면도 와. 다디 타바 진주지래도 시바로 와디 시바지로 뭐 딘데기 상담이나 아니 타발라디 용초고요. 와. 다 담대 진주네지 내가 레레 파방도 아니 타바 진주지 도고요라다 근데 타바 진주지 도고니 티야 만 진짜 갈래 야처럼 조용 살아야겠다. 네.
그래서 기념용 이렇게
예, 마음에 통고 타와요 이지에 되네래서 들어. 타와요 이지 이어서.
Talking from personal experience, the way I inferred the possibility of liberation or cessation existing I started to reflect on speech and the speech affecting other of this, like lying, gossips, or harsh speech. So with talking badly to people, harsh speech, noticing that when sometimes it just spills out, and of course, the recipient of that harsh speech would be upset, no need to say, but also it would make me unhappy, isn't it? Like the moment I'd said that harsh word, I felt upset. But then I thought, okay, so from today, I'll make the resolve not to speak harshly. And then to not speak harshly. So if the conditions come, not to do that. So that when the conditions come under which you would speak harshly, you don't do that. You don't let it slip out. And as a result of not acting in the way that you did before, then you're protected. You're like, there's not the suffering that goes with having harmed someone with harsh speech. And this is an example of a small cessation of suffering and training in that so that it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and so that eventually, yeah.
Tarba yoga to jig rigba odinde samdana ya where suzu nyol samdana ba tandangare marala dungi nyongwa ya karidora suzu dungi la samdana ngijung ke bora ngijung stu dungi la tabe tawa tuni ni jeta lode ta samdana digiyorwa chesa suzu dungi nyonda la samdana ma tu ni jige ro simji shin la migwe ningje dan chamba ketwa koran yo mare chesa dinza kiwu chungu da kiwu dingi nyamlende kiwu chenpyo ge lamga bogdan charu tarwa kharsa na susu dunge la pa ne dunge tendo ge tsawa susu la le yonde ani to simje thamje la ya ta chi dunge tendo ge tsawa de le chogro parabe dunge de samdang de mesewe je le thogro chena din de lamring ge kiwu chungu kiwu ding nyamlende kiwu chenpyo ge shirin ge mangshi le de tang ngone ge o ta de ngone re sha sang wale chikpe sikdipe nuwa chambore waro.
So one needs to reflect whether or not the state of liberation is actually something that can be accomplished, actualized through one's experience. Because we know that the definition of renunciation or definite emergence is that there's a mind that's striving for liberation, but really that has to come from one's own experience. Because if you can't recourse to your own experience, how could you even think of cultivating loving kindness, great compassion to other beings? Cannot. So therefore, if we think on the context of the three capacities of practitioner, initial, medium, and vast capacity, those first two, initial and medium, are really dealing with this premise of your own condition at the foundation and valid experiences of getting over your own suffering predicament. No.
Di ta tarwa. Ta dene nganzo ta tansan tanzi inare, doja inare, sheda inare, nyumu ge kyongre ge nyumu re yede. Ane timasi garwa tima. Te timasim ge ranshin la shugore be serwa. Timasim ge ranshin la shugore. Te samdana ya wero. Timasim ge ranshin la shuna la da sanje ge timabando de simbando garwa. Are.
Yeah.
Timabando de simbando ta. Ane sanje ge la simmela ta ro. Simme dewanyo ni mesro labgoya ge da nega chaya nega yaro. Cheza timasim ge ranshin la shumewa yinzang timade semne terung yinba wa pena timasa de nange timba tubuna yinba timba tubu de pa yedu de nimewe se shawo da nimewe se de nimewe se de semna shi semdira je we self sigdo da de ndel pe du sam dangi na ni nang zo ge gyon de de khadu ne ko gyon jin je de me ko kan jila me wa cha ji du sam dan de ne rawa ji le go ro rawa yu na an zo de la yi je che to nye che tumba je ani shin de taw de nyu lo sa di yin de nang ba ta nang ba sin yi cha ji de ne cha go ro taw de nyu lo yu na
Then we can reflect on the mind that strives for liberation. We have to get over self-grasping, desires, attachment, hatred, all of these afflictions. When we look at these afflictions, disturbing thought obscurations, they're often called stains. And the question comes, are those stains part and parcel of the mind or not? Are they the nature of the mind? If they are, then when Buddha gets rid of the stains in their continuum, does it follow that they no longer have a mind, that they no longer have bliss? We can conclude then that the stains, these disturbing thought obscurations, are adventitious, meaning they can be separated from the mind stream, similar to a thick cloud obscuring the sun's rays. The stains obscure the nature of mind. So that means that the faults that appear in mind are not always there, and that they can be made no more. So that gives us a kind of a hope and conviction. So therefore you have the mind that's striving for liberation. Once the mind turns towards liberation, then we can be like a Buddhist in definition.
Yezanda timalu yimbe gyumzen khare sirwa timalu yimbe gyumzen khare sina ani chi gen da nang gen tewe to gi ani lubu de ge do gore ani ko rwa pena timalu we de chi gen na gen ni ga chana ani pena ngara zo rwa ji kondo do de ja do ji se chi gen da nang gen ni ga chana de ani kondo sa ya da de ja sa ya da ta do je cha mo yung yo re 인용자는 다녀오다 정말 고조사를
야,
제가 네 가르딩가서는 치견과는 루버와 게 치견의 정말 루버와 치견 난제 정말 루버 인자 루버들 때문에 제외 녀몬데 루버 심데 루버 차도 다나 아니 치견의 다견 치견 변화 컨트롤사자로 되자제세 유도지 먼저 그 되자제세 유디 산제를 되자지 그래서는 산제 되자지가 말아 산제 되자지 유셔지 닝지지 그러더라고. 와. 아니 먼저 컨트롤사제 유디 산제기 컨트롤사 그래서는 산제 되는 닝지지 그러면서 이제 컨트롤사가 말해. 난게 산제인데 배들어가 되고요. 치기인데 지거래. 먼저 컨트롤라니 산제 컨트롤라니 지거래. 이나 먼저 컨트롤사 산제 맞아 준다는 산제 난게 셈디 셈디 시외간을 내대긴자 셈투고요 말아 먼저 치긴 참여간 나그 셈투도 아니 컨도사야 가제사야 타도사야 정모친 투도고 여러 와체다 정말 루어 임베 줌진직다 딘다간 삼다네 디고레스가
one can reflect on the reason for the stains of the mind being adventitious, that when the outer and inner meet, these stains come up, they're produced. So in dependence on external conditions and inner ones, anger arises, or jealousy. And once anger, jealousy, and so forth have been made manifest, then problems come. So these outer and inner conditions are adventitious. Sometimes there, sometimes not. So therefore the mind stains works like that. So the object of desirous attachment or anger being the same for Buddhas and sentient beings. For Buddhas, being an object of compassion, or what would be for us something that irritates us, for a Buddha would be an object of compassion. So here the external object might be the same, but the inner mind perceiving them is different. So for Buddha's mind, those objects wouldn't upset their mental peace. But for us, because the outer conditions like that, we hallucinate and project. So in that sense, you can approach adventitious stains like that manner.
그래서 다 어, 먼저 다 가서 그래. 배나 딘데건 상담하야 보여. 배나 먼저 셈나 다 셈이 영어 숙좀 보시오. 셔와. 근데 지금 대변이 주다 만을 채용으로. 근데 셈 남도 마음에 러다 만을 샤용으로. 근데 셈 대대 대지 남도 좀 이제 남도 투대에 내가 붙는데. 어디 용어로 안 하지 용어다로. 근데 왜 내가 들라니? 다수수 지 개발요는 아니 라마 공제 지 제르무진 공 믹스마타 스테너라 아니 제르무진 공 믹스마타 데데 심디 지 제르무진다 믹스메가는 샤자윈다 당기기 툭된줘도 제데 라리 와 타요 니데 이지다는데 메나 양코 우중 공제제로 우중 공자 우츠도 파도 데타 데데 당기기 심툭된줘도 남자 시도로 제가 네 루요와 임바당 네 주마 제로 임바도 문에 신는데 가는 저에 렐 하우지 신야 지레데 아무도 더 나치고
Yeah,
말하라
정리해야 될 앞으로. The mind is discursed or distracted with a lot of thoughts of the past, or conversely, has all these hopes, constructs about the future, thoughts that really are inappropriate or not valid, a lot. And however, if we have faith in our guru or Lama Tsongkhapa and we do some prayers like Miksema mantra, we'll find that those discursive thoughts tend to pacify a bit and eventually calm down. They're lost. If that process is not applicable for one, you can focus on the breath, inhalation, exhalation. And when one starts to do that, you also find that those discursive thoughts you had previously pacify. Now, in terms of recognizing adventitious stains like that, to know them is easy, isn't it? But often we don't have interest, we don't put effort.
아니 야슈지라다 저랑도 상황 탭로엘 가우도로와
Yeah.
근데 지 남림다 베제드네 로나 수수 심디 베제디나데 파탄샤위나 아니 차단 심나라 차단제에 매우 차로라 아니 베제 따베제라 수수레 지 시보다 기부 용한데 용구로다 두도 시디두야다 타워두지게 냠뇨레 아니 하고도 베제망보다는 롭좀 신용으로 신나 레레 신용도 마신브레 세로고라로 마신브레 세베세베들 고데레르 두 두용고요 제가 계속 베제다야도 베야고르도
And then there's also the case of alleviating the state of unknowing. When you read books like the Lamrim, the Graduated Path to Enlightenment, because you're focused on reading them, the mind is not distracted. And as a result of becoming familiar and reading them, the mind can be peaceful and happy. Because really, those books are concerned with the state of liberation. And through one's experience, when one starts to learn something and knowing, on the other hand, what is gotten rid of is the not knowing. Yeah, so that state of unknowing is alleviated.
제가 하나저 아니 따직 딘시냠네세도 직체도 탁부라지래 돼. 선로 여고시다나 단다 그 초연안에 당당 고미야망고 요대 요냐래서
On the one hand, when we think of the Four Noble Truths, it's kind of like tough or deep. But when we really apply it to our life's experience, it's doable.
그래서 딘데가라 곰잡제 네 수수게 견로 제쇼 가리임바디 이만에 이만 용으로 땅 터비나 아니 다라래 거든 두지 리와 역시 되래다
Now, when one meditates day by day and one recognizes one's biggest fault, weakness, if you day by day try to reduce that, that is getting towards the cessation.
다 거든 진이 상와데 아니 네 통람이 내가 뭐지 도구 말해라 통람 단 동반이 무슨도 또안 뒤도기 다 뉴모 직 딱군다로 이제 대외 제와 톱 뒤내가 뭐지 거든 진이 상와데 박배 내가 뭐지 도와요 말했어요
Yeah, but when we look at the cessation in terms of its, definition, the path of seeing, and we're looking at the Aryas who have abandoned these, intellectually acquired grasping at ourselves of persons.
제가 반자 딜레야 반자 반당 림바데 직신에야 보여로
Yeah,
먼저 단다 우중 검자스도
yeah,
내가 다 남도 매우 바뀌어베 소시와 아니 신에 구매하다도 대외뉴모 문주와 방배 탐나러 와 문주와데 매스나 양자야 용구여로 다디 직진베 남지 뉴보된다들 다 직진레 대와서 통람 직진레 대와라 직진레베 대외 남지 디 뉴보데 사면랄 미지베 추진신에 방다는다
yeah,
그래서 니켜 반자 반다를 바디 지금 문주와 내가 매우 좀 소래 지금 고베 친제야 제면 줬어요 알아도 신도 매도로 지금 짜고셔는 아니 양자 제면도 와 어디나시 짜고 자니로 대람디 꼭 된서야 돼 된데 대회 다 대화 타와 유어메베 대화지 그 대화디 미다보다 레들레 유단 genji 네 동해 뭐 덤파주 주어줘야 매든 좋지와 지난다 게지게지기도 주어줘라 이나야 먼저 대화디 유진이도 그 줄제 동해 차로 오더라 타버톱다 뒤에는 토론 톱사는 고den식 톱사는 가도 있는 대외용 어디 그러면서 지금 그 유래하지네요 말해서
okay. Then we can look at that state of cessation from the point of view of the abandonments and the antidotes. Or what's being obtained by way of countermeasures. One can also look at it in terms of cultivating calm abiding using breath from the perspective of the worldly attainments and abandonments and the post-worldly or mundane and transmundane. So on the first level, we're working at abandoning the gross attributes of the desire realm so that initially they're just not grossly manifest. But when we get into transmundane or transworldly, we start talking about the path of seeing, whereby we not only do those gross attributes of the desire realm not manifest, but their seeds are vanquished so that that cannot come back. They cannot grow back. So then that state of liberation of cessation, the transmundane one, the bliss is still there. It's still impermanent, but it's a state of bliss that can't be reversed. I mean, you can't fall back to a state of.
Oh yeah, that 계지슈디 ogden 두지 리과도 저 직신에 배워라. 직신이나 아는 상황으로 다 디지털 얘기여라. 아니 디지털 텐데 되어지고 요래 텐데 되어서야다 ogden사들에 근데야 슈지는 탈발라디 무요라. 다 두두 탄다. 아는 저 당고 니지 톱자디 인데 톱지 유담에 간데스 토고 유담에 아니 지 나는 냠nen시나 톱투고를 배세요 봐. 두두 상담나네. 어다 오딘스니지도 도스로 기셔나신다. 데 주마 지 심지라신을 마슈바당 유디 녀베도 비정아 임바당 로친질로 임바당 접전세만 매와당 아든데 망보도 와라. 근데선 망보다디 오다 안되면은 다 수수지 강해로 동해로 시비 유역하돌라. 정말람 시켜제 신세제 바셔. 정말람 지간 되네 내가 들라. 시바 지고 용해야 되는 용거 도저한 뒤주터네 거긴 좀 두고 열다와 진짜선 좀 단도나
알람 물론 더 몇번도 에
저저 되네가로 심디 배세직 되되나 동이 제에 말아 되네가
login. So for us then, it's initially good to think on these definitions of the liberated state of true cessation as they are in the text, but also to think, is that possible? Can we do it? I mean, can we accomplish that state of cessation or not? And if so, how do we go about it? Can we practice that or not? And to know what defines true cessation in terms of what we talked about, the stains of the mind being adventitious. We also talked about the object, the mistaken grasping at the self of persons not being a valid consciousness, and how that can be reversed with a valid consciousness correctly perceiving. So there is that, but there's also the fact that if we do prayers and aspirations, and we're single-pointed about those prayers and aspirations, because the mind is focused in, that can also alleviate sufferings.
Oh yeah. This
Yes. Any questions?
Yeah, John has.
If I can ask about that third kind of suffering, the compound pervasive suffering.
Mm-hmm.
If you say a bit more about that, would be great. And also the why it's so hard to abandon. I wonder if it's related to the discursive thoughts that go on all the time.
Thank you. The question was, the third type of suffering, compounded pervasive suffering, could that be explained a bit more? And why is it so hard to abandon? Is it because we're always having discursive thought? The 동요 somebody
네.
capadichegi 동요 the younger tes monks 저외체 young 그래서 capadichegi 동요 the pang couple what
네.
the kurangi somso the pang couple games and the kaisana and the same la kadena namdo what
네.
namgo king pang couple
네. 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 직내다 저도지 동해라디 빵카오 당 시티 좀제 가르스나 공오 타오 신 모디 동해이 바신 가고 싶어요. 동해 당 동해 와라 겨쳐왔다. 동해라는 초와임으로 단대디 초와를 거고요 말아. 류딘 코란 동해 우리 랍사로 류딘 먼저 류딘데와 미망고진 류딘 야고 싶지 인텐 거요.
yeah
류딘디 코란 동해 외란 시리즈 랍사로 류딘 아니 먼저 류디와 류디 제단디 류디 모디 동해와 임바디 코 동해기 겐테나 남사 동해 겐와 안고 주고라 레다 뉴몬드네 초인자 주고라 다 레뇨 당 직투된 요소인자 아니 대우거나 투된 요소 와 요데 나라저 디지 치고라 나라저 뭐지고라 다디 줌제 또가 방거에 줌제 찍도 뭐 타와다 니네다 남도 먼저 심디 주미지 남도 나는 고거제 대대르미시 무니지로 다른 곳이 잘 되더라 어디로 와다
yes compounded pervasive suffering difficult because it's a dukten, meaning it's a true suffering. It's not just the fact that you're suffering, which is a feeling thing, but it is the fact that you can't even recognize that's the nature of it. So, for example, the body is it. Most people think, oh, my body's fine. But actually, the body's nature is dissatisfaction and suffering. The body's entity is dissatisfaction and suffering because once it meets a certain condition, it will produce that result. Here, it is because if the causes are delusion and karma, the result can only be dissatisfactory. So because the causes are mistakes, the result is unsatisfactory. Discord, yeah. And with regards to the mind, because the mind is always having these thoughts that are not valid and are inappropriate, we get further and further away from reality.
제가 캡아 되지 세도와 캡세도 될라 치 고단데 캡 담으네요. 캡세야데 근데 풍부디 토 시즌에 만냥간 봐도 캡되고 그러와. 그러와 먼저 시즌을 겨울에는 류된지 거래 야월에 겨울에는 류된지 거래 류된지 가와이는 코베네가 가와이는 캡되고 싫어.
Okay.
진짜 캡서 들라고.
All right. So then why is it called compound pervasive suffering? Because from the peak of samsara to the lowest hell, you attribute a body. You know, you have to have a body. You're embodied. And yeah, it pervades that breadth.
캡아치 되지 세도.
Yeah.
되지 세야데. 레다 녀몽 때문에 되체 버와. 레녀니 때문에 되체. 고 레다 녀몽 때문에 중딩 교지 레미시지
And then the compound part of pervasive suffering is that the bodies we appropriate are compounded by karma and disturbing emotions. It's not like a whole heap of virtues came together and we are here. Yeah, but if you accumulate a vast store of merit, then the result can be Buddhahood or Pure Land.
캬바 되지 동에서야 과당 과랜단 지금 갈라서나.
Yeah.
캬바스야 되게 아니 동에 꿈이 캬바 동에신 동에다 유에 동에 여러 봐.
Yeah.
개가나지 동에 여러. 대다 군지 아니 자와 대다 군 과연에 코여되고. 대다 군 계세 시
Yeah, we can also connote from compounded pervasive suffering that all of those other levels come about because of the root. So like suffering of change, birth, aging, sickness and death, that's pervaded by the root.
다 괜찮아. 동해줘야 괜찮대. 람상 동해지. 동해 저야게 게마르는 동해 마제베 내가 줄 딘데질 콜레나 다다 치고다 로 이말 동해 나랑 줄 류딘데라 동해 저야게 겐스테디 람사 동해 제로도
Yeah.
동해 저야게 치게 나게 겐지 마테나 동해 지금인도 봐 진짜 딘데지기 시질라니 잡아두지 동해에서 코샤위나 니 페다다 코다다는 도레스.
Yeah, and then also to reflect on compound pervasive suffering that when the body meets a certain condition, it will experience that dissatisfaction and suffering. If it doesn't, it won't. But the moment it does, it experiences that dissatisfaction, so it's pervaded.
Oh yeah, that is all. No question.
Any more?
Okay, that is all. 매도 담레라 린시니데 젬바데 산게 신데 감다 신나 주바 제가 제네 저주 제마 모산 덴베 드메 사수 드웨 메세다도네 조지
The word granted every single benefit and happiness in the world. bringing the thoroughly kind things and deaths of I speech. You and all the wishes with one thing is fulfilled. Stay with his own and teachings and transmigrated beings. He makes extremely clear the power that is the unification of openness and compassion. We alone and all the things and gaps so I beseech. May all the holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You love all the secure moral ways, the servants of bountiful bearer of war. With thanks for serving, spreading merchandise, victorious spectrum. Masterfully accomplished magnificent prayer, honoring the three doors. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please place your free return. Overwhelming with your accumulations of myself and others for the 3 times. May the teachings of the Conqueror, love same drop of light for a long time. And along with I think. Feeling the assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Stravatas and Pratika Buddhas, victorious ones and father and sons, along with lineage masters. All the objects of refuge in the lands, that we could always devote to the wisdom and accomplishing this prayer right now. Following and spreading and working expressions and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you will become patience and never discouraged, incomparable and glory to you, our intent. While striving to the sacred victorious one its teachings, the soul gateway to which many benefits and happiness emerge. And for all other living beings, you sovereignly divided to please for the greater ones. Nevertheless, to announce the truth of the blessed devotion of the three tools, in the great ways of the chief of the children of the victorious ones, by the smile of the incarnation of the being in the world of Christian disciples.
Good night.
Night.